Hello and welcome to News Now. I am Deji Badimasi. Suspected members of the deadly Islamist sect Boko Haram have killed at least 8 people in an overnight raid on a village near Cameroon's northern border. A local government and a military source also said at least 100 others were kidnapped by the suspected militants in the village identified as Chakamari. The attacks, which occurred on Tuesday, comes barely 5 days after Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari visited Cameroon to discuss ways of effectively tackling the Boko Haram insurgency with Cameroon President Paul Biya. Boko Haram has launched a fresh wave of attacks which has led to the death of hundreds in Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad and Niger. All 4 countries have collaborated to wage an intense offensive against the radical Islamist sect, I should say. Now, the Nigerian Army says troops in recovery operations now have cleared a major road in the northeast of improvised explosive devices planted by Boko Haram insurgents. Spokesperson for the 7th Division of Nigerian Army, Colonel Tukur Gusau, made this known in a statement issued in Maiduguri on Wednesday. He said troops of the division, during clearance and linking up operations, recovered the IEDs planted on the road linking Goza and Yamteke. According to the statement, the explosives had since been defused and destroyed by a team of the Nigerian Army Engineer Corps. Former Chief of Staff of the Nigerian Army, Chief of Army Staff, I should say, Lieutenant General Kenneth Minima has formally retired from the force. He was pulled out of the force at a colorful ceremony in the nation's capital territory, Abuja. The ceremony actually took place at Mogadishu Cantonment in the Federal Capital Territory. In attendance at the ceremony were governors and top military officers, including the man who took over from Minima, Major General Yusuf Buratai, the new Chief of Army Staff. Speaking at the event, General Minima said he did his best to secure the country and deal with the Boko Haram insurgency. He added that despite the seeming resurgence of Boko Haram, the sect is close to being completely defeated.
My appointment as Chief of Army Staff on 16 January 2014 was undoubtedly the defining moment of my military service. You will recall the appointment came at a time our army and indeed the nation was going through one of the worst crises in our history. The level of violence and insecurity unleashed on innocent citizens by the Boko Haram terrorists had reached unprecedented heights. There was spate of bombings across the country. Attacks on soft targets such as civilians and vulnerable communities were on the increase. The armed forces and security agencies appeared helpless to address the situation. And sadly, the nation began to lose confidence in its army and military. The situation was no less grim in the north, north central, and northwestern zones, where armed bandits, cattle rustlers, and ethnic militias held sway. The nation seemed to be heading towards the much publicized disintegration some had predicted would occur in 2015. And by God's grace, we will survive this year as one nation. As I settled down to work, I was confronted with decay in the service due to long periods of neglect the army has suffered. An assessment of the situation revealed that the Nigerian Army needed to harness its capabilities and optimize its capacity to deal with the challenges that bedeviled the nation. I therefore prioritized efforts towards enhancing our overall operational readiness through the 3 pillars of improved training, modernization of equipment, and enhancement of troops welfare. Above all, I inspired and rekindled fighting spirit in the troops backed by military sanctions. I'm happy to state that the story is different today, and the situation much better than I met it. Today, the country is more secure and stable. The ability of Boko Haram terrorists to confront our security forces in open combat is virtually non-existent. A nation is as strong as its armed forces. And the strength of the armed forces is in the quality of the individual soldier and his fighting spirit. Fighting spirit imbues him with confidence to stand up to the adversary red and flee like we witnessed in the recent past. While adequate attention to his welfare demonstrates his nation's commitment to his well-being and motivates him to sacrifice everything, including his life, while discipline and sanctions confines him within military laws. For long, our nation has toyed with the health and vitality of its military. This is the time for our country to reinvigorate the Nigerian armed forces by investing in the armed forces. Government must provide the necessary resources and right political environment to recruit, train, equip, kit, and remunerate our servicemen. We all have a role to play to make our armed forces great again. Sometimes, all it takes is a simple thank you and encouraging words to the men and women who watch over our freedom and liberty. Never again should we allow ourselves to walk this path that we are. Never again.
The former Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Kenneth Minima, who has just retired from the Nigerian Army. Now, the Nigerian Labour Congress has commended the Central Bank of Nigeria's directive to banks to publish names of chronic debtors, saying it will strengthen the economy. Secretary of the NLC, Peter Ozor, on Wednesday said the banks made the right move by going ahead to heed the directive of CBN to publish names of the debtors. He said that it would be unfavorable to the country's economic growth for anyone to owe banks millions of naira without paying back. Commercial lenders in Nigeria on Monday listed hundreds of bad debtors in full-page newspaper adverts following orders from the central banks. However, the decision has received mixed reactions from majority of Nigerians. Now, oil prices edged up for a second day on Wednesday, recovering from a drop below $50 a barrel. This comes as weekly data showed a fall in U.S. crude inventories, while a stronger dollar tempered gains. Growing oversupply slowing demand actually from China, and the prospect of crude flooding onto the market from Iran after Tehran's deal with the West over its nuclear program have knocked 21% off the oil price this quarter. A stronger dollar tends to undermine crude oil by making it more profitable for non-U.S. investors to sell. President Barack Obama has today called on Iran to honor the agreement on the nuclear deal. He asked Iran not to cheat, calling for a good relationship between the two countries. In a special address, the U.S. president dealt with concerns of critics who say the deal only empowers Iran and would not last.
When we carefully examine the arguments against this deal, none of them stand up to scrutiny. That may be why the rhetoric on the other side is so strident. I suppose some of it can be ascribed to knee-jerk partisanship that has become all too familiar. Rhetoric that renders every decision that's made a disaster, a surrender. You're aiding terrorists. You're endangering. On the other hand, I do think it's important to acknowledge another more understandable motivation behind the opposition to this deal, or at least skepticism to this deal. And that is a sincere affinity for our friend and ally Israel. An affinity that, as someone who has been a stalwart friend to Israel throughout my career, I deeply share. When the Israeli government is opposed to something, people in the United States take notice. And they should. No one can blame Israelis for having a deep skepticism about any dealings with a government like Iran's, which includes leaders who deny the Holocaust, embrace an ideology of anti-Semitism, facilitate the flow of rockets that are arrayed on Israel's borders, are pointed at Tel Aviv. In such a dangerous neighborhood, Israel has to be vigilant. And it rightly insists that it cannot depend on any other country, even its great friend, the United States, for its own security. So we have to take seriously concerns in Israel. But the fact is, partly due to American military and intelligence assistance, which my administration has provided at unprecedented levels, Israel can defend itself against any conventional danger, whether from Iran directly or from its proxies. On the other hand, a nuclear-armed Iran changes that equation. And that's why this deal ultimately must be judged by what it achieves on the central goal of preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This deal does exactly that. I say this as someone who has done more than any other president to strengthen Israel's security. And I have made clear to the Israeli government that we are prepared to discuss how we can deepen that cooperation even further. Already we've held talks with Israel on concluding another 10-year plan for U.S. security assistance to Israel. We can enhance support for areas like missile defense, information sharing, interdiction, all to help meet Israel's pressing security needs, and to provide a hedge against any additional activities that Iran may engage in as a consequence of sanctions relief. But I have also listened to the Israeli security establishment, which warned of the danger posed by a nuclear-armed Iran for decades. In fact, they helped develop many of the ideas that ultimately led to this deal. So to friends of Israel and to the Israeli people, I say this: a nuclear-armed Iran is far more dangerous to Israel, to America, and to the world than an Iran that benefits from sanctions relief. I recognize that Prime Minister Netanyahu disagrees strongly. I do not doubt his sincerity, but I believe he is wrong. I believe the facts support this deal. I believe they are in America's interest and Israel's interest. And as President of the United States, it would be an obligation of my constitutional duty to act against my best judgment, simply because it causes temporary friction with a dear friend and ally. I do not believe that would be the right thing to do for the United States. I do not believe it would be the right thing to do for Israel.
The President of the United States of America, Barack Obama, speaking on the nuclear deal with Iran there. We'll take a short break and news now. We'll be right back. Every day, every hour, and every minute, news break in Nigeria. Things happen so fast, it's most times difficult to track and comprehend them. But that's what we do right here on TV360. 2015, would you want to come back again?
It's like asking Jesus Christ if he knew he was going to die, will you want to come back as the savior of the world again?
We do not just help you track the stories, we break them down, explore all the angles, analyze the issues so that you can fully comprehend the stories and use them to make the right decisions. Welcome back. A boat packed with migrants from Africa overturned in the Mediterranean Sea on Wednesday, plunging passengers into the water. The Italian Coast Guard speculated that about 700 people may have been aboard the boat when the incident occurred. Now, more than 2,000 migrants and refugees have died so far this year trying to cross the Mediterranean to reach Europe. The International Organization for Migration says the figures are quite high compared with the 3,279 deaths recorded during the whole of last year. At least 31 people have been confirmed dead, after two Indian passenger trains derailed. Officials say at least 25 people have been injured and another 300 rescued. The trains derailed within minutes of each other on flooded tracks on a bridge in central India in Madhya Pradesh. It was not clear how many people were on both trains. However, authorities speculate that both trains may have had as many as 1,600 people on board. This is the fifth train accident to occur in the country this year. train travel is the most popular form of long-distance travel in India, but the railway system is known to be poorly maintained. To sports now, undefeated boxing star Floyd Mayweather will face Andre Bato on September 12 for the final fight of his career. The bout will be his last fight following a 6-fight deal he signed with Showtime CBS in 2013. The 38-year-old announced the fight with a statement on his official Twitter account. But shortly after making that announcement, the boxer came under scathing criticism, especially on Twitter, with most boxing fans accusing him of being a coward for settling for what they call a very weak opponent. Beto is a 2-time welterweight world title holder who currently holds an interim belt. He has lost 3 of his last fights, and most boxing fans don't rank him high at the moment. If Mayweather wins, he will tie the milestone of 49-0 record of the great heavyweight champion Rocky Marciano. Well, I guess Mayweather should have opted for a better opponent, at least an opponent stronger than Bato, so that he could go out on a high. But who knows? The guy just doesn't want to lose. He wants to maintain that record. Everyone believes he's going to beat Beto, but then, you know, in boxing, you never can tell. There just could be surprises. Well, that's it on News Now for now. We thank you very much for watching. We're back again shortly. Continue to stay tuned to TV360.